In today's video, we're going to take a deep dive into why Ripple could IPO very soon and why that would be a game changer, very similar to Amazon's IPO back in 1997. So let's talk about where Ripple stands today. Most of you know the company. They're already a significant player in the blockchain and fintech space. They have a flagship product called RippleNet, which we know facilitates cross-border payments for more than 300 financial institutions globally. Ripple leverages XRP, the token, to settle all of those transactions and the XRPL to be able to provide those services, which cut down on transaction cost and provide more efficient banking solutions than Swift. So think of RippleNet kind of like a Swift 2.0, streamlined, faster, more transparent. But we know that Ripple's journey hasn't been without challenges. One of the biggest hurdles is their ongoing litigation with the SEC. In that litigation, we had the outcome last year where the judge ruled that XRP in and of itself is not a security. And so that keeps that piece away from any kind of appeal. However, the SEC has appealed the ruling that came down on August 7th this year. And so we are back in the loop here of Ripple and the litigation with the SEC. However, with their cross appeal the other day, I think that there's a potential that they could end up settling very quickly here. We haven't seen the Form C filed by the SEC for what exactly they're appealing. They do have until Tuesday of this next week for that to happen. So anyway, I think it's going to go in Ripple's favor. And when it does, that's going to open up the door for them to have a public listing of some kind. So now let's look at Amazon and see why Ripple could follow in a similar path. Back in 1997, Amazon was still primarily known as an online bookstore. They weren't the trillion-dollar tech giant that we know them as today, but they did have the ambition. So before going public, Amazon was burning cash, and they were investing heavily into customer acquisition and expanding their infrastructure. So like Ripple, Amazon faced skepticism from traditional players. People thought, brick and mortar retailers weren't going away, and they didn't necessarily believe in the e-com model until it had been validated. And there were also questions around if Amazon could ever become profitable, which we know they finally have, but it took a long time. So despite the challenges, Amazon did go public in May of 1997, and they raised about $54 million. Now, while that may seem like a small sum in today's numbers, the influx of capital did transform Amazon. It gave them the resources to scale beyond just books. It allowed them to come into new markets like electronics, clothing, and eventually cloud computing with AWS or Amazon Web Services. Now, Ripple finds itself in a very similar position today. They've already established themselves as a leader in blockchain solutions for financial services, but like Amazon pre-IPO, they have the potential to grow to something much larger. Going public could be the key that unlocks the next phase of their exponential growth. At least I think so. So, what could Ripple accomplish if they went public? Let's break it down. First, the company could raise capital from the IPO, and it would allow them to scale quickly on their operations and break into new markets. While Ripple is currently focused on cross-border payments, there's a lot more opportunities in the blockchain space that they could tap into. We've already seen this with their acquisition of Medico, which is now Ripple Custody. They want to break into new markets and create new offerings, and they could do this through acquisition, just like Amazon. So Amazon acquired Whole Foods, Twitch, and Zappos. Ripple could use the capital from the IPO for strategic acquisitions. These acquisitions could be in tokenized securities or RWAs, real world assets, decentralized finance or DeFi. They could even break into the derivatives market if they wanted to, relaunch their smart contract platform, Codius. Another major area that Ripple could invest post-IPO is R&D, or research and development. Blockchain technology is still in the early stages, and there are a lot of untapped opportunities. With more resources, Ripple could accelerate the development of new products and enhance the utility of the XRPL, making it the backbones for smart contracts, tokenized real-world assets, and, they are working with central banks around the world for CBDCs. So hopefully those end up there as well. Now, let's take a moment to talk about how Ripple could go public. We've been discussing the potential for an IPO, which is what most people know, or initial public offering. There's actually a really strong case that Ripple could choose a direct listing instead. But first, let's talk about the difference between the two. So, in a traditional IPO, a company issues new shares to raise capital, and the investment banks typically underwrite this offering, ensuring that a certain number of shares are sold. This involves a bunch of stuff. One of those things is a roadshow. You've got fees that you have to pay to the investment banks, and there's a lot of regulatory oversight. A direct listing, on the other hand, doesn't involve issuing new shares or diluting shareholders, but it also doesn't raise fresh capital. So Instead, existing shareholders would list on public exchanges, giving early investors and employees the chance to sell their holdings directly to the market. This means no new money is raised, but the company would avoid all the cost and potential dilution associated with an IPO. So, why would Ripple be more likely to choose a direct listing? Well, here's a few key factors. First, Ripple already has raised substantial capital through their private funding rounds. They have a strong balance sheet. They have $1.3 billion on their balance sheet after the last quarter. They don't necessarily need to raise more money through an IPO. Instead, a direct listing would allow early investors and the employees to cash out some of their holdings while giving Ripple public market exposure like it needs. Second, Ripple might prefer a direct listing because it offers greater transparency and avoids the lockup period that common IPOs have. So in an IPO, insiders would usually be restricted from selling their shares for a certain period. Most often it's like 6 months. But with a direct listing, there's no restrictions. So this gives more flexibility to early investors and their employees. Finally, a direct listing is often seen as a better option for well-known companies that have a strong brand like Ripple. They don't need an IPO to introduce themselves to the market. Ripple's already a household name. If anybody knows anything about crypto and blockchain, they know about Ripple. So a direct listing could allow them to enter the public markets without the lengthy and expensive process of an initial public offering. Now, let's talk about the benefits for the employees and the shareholders. If Ripple goes public, whether through a direct listing or an IPO, it would likely offer stock options or equity-based compensation to its employees, just like Amazon did in the late 90s and early 2000s. This can be a huge wealth creation opportunity. Employees who joined early and were granted stock options, like Bob Way and David Schwartz, could see massive financial gains if Ripple's stock price appreciates post-listing, which I think it would. Similarly, Ripple's early investors and shareholders would finally have a liquidity event, which Brad Garlinghouse talks about frequently, about providing liquidity to their shareholders. That's why they've done the tender offers over the last couple years. And that's why I also think that this is the likely outcome. And on the other side of that, going public isn't just about raising money. It's about legitimacy. When Amazon went public, it helped legitimize e-commerce in the eyes of investors, customers, and the regulators. A Ripple listing, whether that's through an IPO or a direct listing, would provide validation for the broader blockchain industry, especially after their legal battle with the SEC. Going public would signal that Ripple is ready to play on the global financial stage, solidifying its place as a leader in blockchain fintech. This legitimacy would also increase trust among institutional players, banks, and governments. More transparency would be required, which would strengthen their ability to form even more partnerships than they already have with financial institutions that might currently be on the fence of working with them because of regulatory uncertainties. For Ripple, trust is key to scaling their operations and expanding their offerings. So there you have it. Ripple's position today is not very different from what Amazon was in 1997. Whether choose to go public via an IPO or direct listing, that move could raise the capital needed to scale their operations, make further acquisitions, and innovate in ways that could make XRP a core part of the global financial ecosystem. The opportunities for Ripple post-listing are immense, and if it follows a similar path to Amazon, we could be looking at one of the next giants of the tech world. So let me know what you think. Comment below. Is it going to be a direct listing? Will it be an IPO? Are they going to go public at all? I'd love to know. And with that, we'll wrap it up, and we'll see you guys on the next one.